3 reasons to invest in retail properties and 3 reasons not to invest. So I'm gonna give you the best of both worlds today. Hey, I'm Tim Diesel. I'm a commercial real estate consultant. This channel is designed to give you tips and strategies in your investing business. If you're a broker, this will definitely help your clients. So the number one reason to invest in retail, and these aren't in any order, I'm just gonna give you guys as I know them. The first one is the massive upside. Compared to any other asset class, retail usually has the largest upside. And let's say you have a vacant property and it's 10,000 or 20,000 square feet, maybe even 100,000, whatever. If you get a national tenant, all right, like Skechers shoes or Wendy's or something huge, a grocery store, you're building massive value. I mean, the increase is exponential. It's crazy. Now, if you're comparing that to an apartment building, for example, you cannot grow that quickly. It's just not possible. Generally, you're not going to sign a 7-year or a 5-year deal with a tenant. Most of the time, it's a business, a restaurant, some kind of an anchor tenant. That's who's going to sign that. Office building also, but there's sometimes not as many to choose from. Maybe warehouse, but warehouse you usually have 1, maybe 2 tenants. Storage doesn't really count, right? So, but in retail, if you have a retail plaza and you have a juicer and a grocery store and whatever, the longer those leases stretch out, the more potential value is there. Now, I talked about cap rates in another video, and I've talked about how you can structure them, but the massive upside, that's the number one reason for retail investing. Number 2 is longer sustainable tenants. Going back to a fast food franchise or a Walgreens or something, you're gonna have a 5, a 7, a 10, maybe 15, 20-year deal. A gas station, you're gonna have a really long lease. It's usually not the case with any other type of asset. Usually retail is the only one that allows you to have that long, stable cash flow. Now, if you're doing a single tenant base, it's almost like a bond, right? It's so guaranteed. I mean, it's gonna be there for 20 years and you're virtually no management. I mean, it's as passive as you can get. You still have to file your taxes and do all that rigmarole. But as far as long, sustainable cash flows, you don't have to worry about. Retail really allows you to do that. And the third one's my favorite, way easier to manage. Easier management. In my opinion, it is one of the easiest things to manage, because most of the time the tenants, so if it's a restaurant, the restaurant is responsible for their own licensing, right? They're responsible for their own food grading scale. I'm not too familiar with restaurants, but I know they have to do like safe serve and all that jazz. The landlord doesn't really get involved in that stuff. Most of the time, everything in their space, they're responsible for. Yeah, sure, you have to keep the outside clean and presentable. Everything on the inside is theirs. They're responsible for their sales, their quotas, whatever they're doing. Management is much, much easier. Now, office, not the case, not always. And apartments, forget about it. No way. You're responsible for a whole lot. And warehouse, industrial properties, probably absolute nets can trump the retail, but retail really has some of the easiest management if you set it up correctly, if you write your leases correctly, if you have the right tenants in there, if you spend time on it. It could be a breeze. All right, now the bad news. Here's the 3 things I gotta tell you about retail. It's not so good. Everything costs more. When you're fixing stuff up, it just costs more. The buildings are more expensive. It's harder to find the right people to do the work. So if you have an apartment building, most of anybody can do a lot of easy jobs. So a retail property, A lot of times you can't do it because you have to have things to a certain code. You got to pull permits in certain areas depending on what city, townships, all that stuff. And your bill is always more, right? For some reason, you can spend $75,000 in a 1,000 square foot space. If you're building out a salon, maybe you need plumbing in a couple spots, where in an apartment, it's not likely that someone's going to say, hey, can you move this closet and this bathroom around? Because I don't like how this works. In retail, that's usually the case. Usually this tenant moving in never uses the same stuff the tenant moving out has. You're always doing a whole new build out every single time, unless you get lucky. But most of the time, it's usually not. The only time I've actually seen it where it's like a bank, if a bank takes over another bank and they just rebrand everything, even if it's an ice cream shop and there's another ice cream shop, well, they're going to want their machines on this side. They're going to have their floor plan one way. So everything costs more, from what I noticed in retail. It's a lot more, right? Because you have to spend a lot of money on the outside, because you got to get your tenants in the door. You want to get your patrons in there also for your tenants, and you want to help them. So you have to spend a lot of money on the outside of the structure. All right, number 2 is longer vacancy. Typically, you're going to have vacancies that drag out a lot more. It could be a year, it could be 2. So if a national tenant like a Toys R Us closes, it's going to be vacant for a while, right? Because those big box stores, they're not that easy to fill up. There's only a few tenants sometimes in the whole country that are even interested, or that can actually make something happen. So your vacancy is typically a lot longer. If you have a 1-bedroom apartment, it's very difficult for it to go more than 2 months without someone filling it in. Most of the time, and there's a lot more people that need housing, right? The bigger your space is, it's tough because there's only so many tenants that require that type of space. And the smaller the space is, so if it's 500 to 1,000 square feet, not very many tenants require that type of space typically. So longer vacancies, that's something that usually is typical in retail. All right, the last one, number 3, is financing is very tricky in retail. And I'll tell you why. Most banks are gonna do 65 to 70% financing, LTV. So if your building's $1 million, they're gonna give you 650, maybe 700,000. They used to give a lot more, but obviously retail is not as favored. Now, here's the part that kind of even muddies the waters a little bit. If your property is not 75 or 80% occupied or stable, as the banks like to call it, you can't even get financing. It's just not going to happen. Now, I've seen this happen. I've actually seen it happen in office, a little bit, smaller offices, and I've seen it happen in apartments all the time. Everyone loves apartments, but and you can do single user in industrial properties, so you can get away with SBA financing maybe, or some kinds of owner user. But in retail, if you have a 10,000 square foot building and it's half empty, it's going to be real tough to get a bank to jump on board. You've got to have to do something a little creative, or just to get stable long-term financing. That's the only tricky thing. You have to be above a certain amount. Now, if you're at 85, 90%, 95% occupancy, you're not going to have a problem, right? You have long leases, all that stuff. So the financing can be tricky if your property falls into a little vacancy factor there. All right, my question for you today is, what is your favorite asset class? If you like this video, subscribe to this channel, especially if you found this content useful. Really appreciate all your comments and questions. Thank you guys so much for watching.